It's Persia, roughly in the year 475 BCE. The Jews are living in relative peace, but just below the surface is a deadly anti-Semitism. And it bubbles over when the king's advisor, Haman, calls for the annihilation of all the Jews of his kingdom. In the chilling words of the Megillah that we'll read next week, he seeks to, quote, destroy, massacre, and exterminate all of the Jews, young and old, children and women, on a single day. It sounds eerily familiar, and he almost accomplished it. But before Haman would carry out his deadly plan, there was one Jew that he despised more than all of the others, one Jew who really sparked his genocidal plot. He had to get rid of that Jew first, Mordecai. And his wife, Zeresh, had just the plan. She told Haman, build gallows and hang him on it. Now, this was no ordinary gallows. We read, then Zeresh and all of their friends said to Haman, let gallows be made 50 cubits high, and tomorrow hang Mordecai on it. This suggestion pleased Haman, and he had the gallows erected. Yasu eitz gavoa 50 amah v'ya'as ha'etz. Haman built gallows 50 cubits high. Anyone have any idea how tall 50 cubits is? It's about 6 stories or 75 feet. There's nothing in the entire Bible described as being as tall. Even Solomon's temple that we read about this morning is only 30 cubits high. Various commentaries explain that by making the gallows so high that it could be seen from anywhere near and far, thus instilling fear among the Jews and anyone who defied Haman's orders. Other commentaries see that this is just an example of the Bible's gallows humor, excuse the pun. It's part of the overly exaggerated nature of this entire book of the Bible. A midrash that I came across, though, has a different focus entirely. Not why so high, but where'd they get the wood from? And it offers an intriguing, if fanciful, suggestion. There is one wooden object described in the Torah that's even longer than 50 cubits. Any ideas? I heard someone say, Sid, kol hakavod. The Midrash says that Haman searched for a beam 50 cubits high, but couldn't find one. And so he turned to his son, Parshandata, who was the governor of Ararat. Ararat, does it ring a bell? What was on Ararat? After the flood, Noah's ark came to rest on Mount Ararat. And according to the Torah, it was hundreds of cubits long, plenty of long to supply the wood. And therefore, Heviu mitevato shel Noach. Haman brought the wood from Noah's ark. Now let's pause and consider this unexpected connection. Think about it. In the face of an enormous flood, meant to wipe out an all-pervasive evil that the Torah calls Hamas, Noah built a vessel to save humanity. And now, the evil Haman dismantles that very ark and uses it to threaten the Jewish community. The very wood that was meant to save humankind was now going to be used to destroy the Jewish people. Next week, I'm leading a group from Bethel on a civil rights trip to Alabama, and we will visit the so-called lynching memorial in Montgomery, where we will learn about America's deplorable history of racism. So I can't read even a comic story about gallows and not feel an immediate aversion. But this morning, the reference to Noah's Ark calls to mind not an aversion, but an inversion. Because today, as in the days of ancient Persia, there is a worrisome inversion taking place. That which was meant to protect humanity is now being used against the Jewish people. Here's what I mean. In 1944, a Jewish lawyer named Raphael Lemkin, a refugee from Nazi-controlled Poland, documented crimes perpetrated against his people. And he coined a new term used to describe the destruction of a nation or an ethnic group. That term, of course, is genocide. Later, while serving on the American legal team at the Nuremberg trials, Lemkin was able to get that word genocide, which was not yet a crime, included in the indictment against Nazi leadership. So here is the inversion, that term and that those laws are now being turned against Israel. This is how Dr. Tal Becker, a lawyer for Israel, explained to the International Court of Justice when South Africa brought the charge of genocide against Israel. Madam President, distinguished members of the court, it is an honor to appear before you again on behalf of the State of Israel. The State of Israel is singularly aware of why the Genocide Convention, which has been invoked in these proceedings, was adopted. Given the Jewish people's history, it's not surprising that Israel was among the first states to ratify the Genocide Convention without reservation. For some, the promise of never again is a slogan. For Israel, it is the highest moral obligation. The applicant, South Africa, has now sought to invoke this term in the context of Israel's conduct in a war it did not start and does not want. A war in which Israel is defending itself against Hamas, whose brutality knows no bounds. He continues, the attempt to weaponize the term genocide against Israel in the present context does more than tell the court a grossly distorted story, and it does more than empty the word of its unique force and special meaning. It subverts the object and purpose of the convention itself. It is as if South Africa has taken a board from Noah's Ark meant to save humanity and erected it to hang the Jews. To be sure, the suffering of innocent Gazans is absolutely tragic. But Israel has made it clear in word and in deed that it seeks to destroy Hamas leadership and fighters, not ordinary Gazan civilians. You don't call and text civilians and tell them to flee, as Israel does, if you want to commit genocide. You don't delay in attacking civilian population until it flees, as Israel does, if you plan on committing genocide. You don't coordinate with the international aid organizations, as Israel does, to ship truckloads of shipment of food and humanitarian supplies if you want to commit genocide. And while you might argue that Israel has not done enough to prevent civilian casualties and enable food shipments, and indeed it is tragic what Gazan civilians are experiencing, it's simply absurd and obscene to call it genocide. If anyone should be charged with genocide, of course, it is Hamas that started a war intentionally seeking to, in the words of the Megillah, destroy, massacre, and exterminate the Jews, young and old, women and children, on a single day. But this nauseating inversion is exactly what is happening, not just in the International Court of Justice, but in the court of public opinion, by city council members and college students, by academics, and, as we saw recently, by actors. And even by Jews, as we saw this past week at the Oscars, when Jonathan Glazer, writer and director of the Holocaust drama The Zone of Interest, used his acceptance speech to comment on the Israel-Hamas war. Glazer's statement was convoluted and unclear, but his point was that Israel is weaponizing the Holocaust, using the Holocaust to justify its occupation, which has led to the suffering of Palestinians and Israelis. Now, there is no doubt that the Holocaust plays an important role in the Israeli psyche, but no one is using it to justify the occupation. As the Survivors Foundation wrote in a public response to Glazer, you should be ashamed of yourself for using Auschwitz to criticize Israel. The occupation has nothing to do with the Holocaust. The Jewish people's existence and right to live in the land of Israel predates the Holocaust by hundreds and thousands of years. If the creation, existence, and survival of the state of Israel as a Jewish state equates to occupation, then you've obviously learned nothing from your movie, they said. Now, to be fair, in recent months, several leaders have made Holocaust comparisons. It's not totally surprising, since this was the deadliest attack on Jews since the Holocaust. For example, former Israeli Prime Minister Naftali Bennett said about Hamas, "We're fighting the Nazis." This was not weaponizing the Holocaust. It was an expression of anguish and resolve by a traumatized leader. When President Biden commemorated International Holocaust Remembrance Day, saying, "We cannot remember all that Jewish survivors of the Holocaust experienced and then stand silently by when Jews are attacked and targeted again," he was not weaponizing the Holocaust. He was offering support, comfort, and reassurance. Now, it is true, it's not always appropriate to reference the Holocaust. And although, as I've said before, the IDF found Hitler's Mein Kampf translated into Arabic in an apartment in Gaza, and although Hamas and the Palestinian Authority regularly engage in Holocaust denial, Hamas is not the Nazis. The historical context, the ideology, and the tactics are entirely different. So any comparisons must be made judiciously. But Chaverim, let's be clear. Learning from the Holocaust is not the same as weaponizing the Holocaust. And an essential lesson we must learn from Haman as from Hitler is that if they say they're going to kill you, believe them. And Hamas says they're going to kill us. So they must be dealt with like Haman and like the Nazis. To charge Jews with weaponizing the Holocaust for calling out never again is to undermine the very International Court of Justice that was established out of the ashes of the Shoah. But if anything, learning from the Holocaust to protect Jewish lives is to sanctify the memory of those killed in the Shoah. Haman took that which was meant to save humanity, Noah's Ark, and turned it against the Jews to destroy us. In the same way, Hamas and their allies are using the laws and the language created to protect humanity, inverted them, and are turning them against the Jews. Well, I hope that what was true in the days of Purim will be true in our own day. Because do you remember what happens? V'na'afochu, an inversion at the end of the book of Esther. We read, on the very gallows made for Mordechai, Haman was hung. And with this reversal, the Jews of Shushan were saved. V'na'afochu, they turned a time of darkness into light, a time of mourning into a time of rejoicing, a time of fear into a time of joy. So may it be in our own day. Amen.